Well, welcome to the 700 Club. Unstoppable so far. The coronavirus rages on in China. And now the deadly scourge is spreading at an alarming rate in other countries around the world. Italy, Iran, and South Korea, where the president is calling for unprecedented steps to stop it. The question is, can this deadly disease be stopped? Here's health reporter Lori Johnson.
The number of cases in China increasing to 77,000, including 2,400 deaths, followed by Japan with 840 cases and 4 deaths, then South Korea with over 830 cases, including 7 deaths. Also Italy quarantining some areas as it faces the first major outbreak in Europe, reporting more than 200 cases and 5 deaths. And in the Middle East, Iran with 43 cases and 12 deaths. Infectious disease specialists like the Cleveland Clinic's Dr. Frank Esper are analyzing a new report detailing the first 72,000 cases. He told CBN News the virus spreads through droplets.
We think that most times people are being infected when they are coughed nearby in a 6-foot radius or so, or sneezed in a 6-foot radius. It aerosolizes in that small area for a very brief amount of time. It is not like SARS. SARS was airborne. Measles is airborne. That's where the virus can lay around in the room for 2 hours, waiting for someone to inhale it. This coronavirus is not like that. It is mostly you have to be in the same room, in the same close proximity with another individual to be infected.
Eastern Virginia Medical School infectious disease Dr. Edward Oldfield says new information about people who carry the virus make it more difficult to control.
Now we're finding there's significant amounts of virus in the nasal passages and the oropharynx, even in people that have no symptoms.
That includes people who've already recovered from it. The good news, a vaccine and treatments possibly within months, fast-tracked because of COVID-19's similarity to SARS, a coronavirus from 17 years ago.
The protease inhibitor Kaletra had activity against SARS. They've already started a study in Wuhan. There's another experimental drug called remdesivir, and they've also started a study with that.
Experts say expect more deadly coronaviruses unless China deals with crowded, unsanitary markets where wild animals are sold and slaughtered, the kind where both SARS and COVID-19 reportedly first transferred to humans. Meanwhile, doctors say right now Americans should still be more concerned with the flu.
This is probably the worst flu season in a decade. It started with influenza B. Right at the January of 2020, it started dropping down, so we thought maybe it was going to be a short season, and then it came roaring back with influenza A.
The CDC reports 16,000 flu deaths in America so far this season, including 105 children. Pat?
Well, Laura, you mentioned this COVID-19 and SARS. They both started from animals to humans. What is it they do with those markets that's so unsanitary?
Well, Pat, bats are the originator of SARS, MERS, and COVID-19. According to scientists, bats carry about 400 coronaviruses, and because of their immune system, they don't get sick from them, but they do sometimes pass coronaviruses on to other animals, which are then sold at these markets. They're called wet markets, and wild animals are sold to thousands of people. Remember, Pat, Wuhan is a city of 58 million people, 11 times the size of New York City, and they're often butchering these animals on cutting boards and then putting other animals on them. In other words, the viruses can spread like wildfire. With SARS, the Chinese government closed down these wet markets, but then opened them again after it passed. Now with COVID-19, the Chinese government shut down the wet markets, but have said that after this COVID-19 scare passes, they're going to open them again.
Well, Laurie, what can science learn about this coronavirus by looking at other viruses in the same family?
There are 7 coronaviruses in humans. 4 of them, Pat, are actually part of the common cold, so they're very mild. The other three are MERS, SARS, and COVID-19, which all have higher death rates, and they were all passed to humans from bats to other animals and then to humans. And so there are three of these new coronaviruses that are more serious than the first four.
Well, now, somebody that wants to prevent getting COVID and the flu, what would you recommend?
Actually, they're both transmitted the exact same way with droplets. So the main thing is to wash your hands with warm soapy water for 20 seconds. And also to, when you cough or sneeze, do it in the crook of your arm or also into a Kleenex.
Are you worried about this stuff in America? Or you think influenza is still a much more serious virus, right?
Well, the CDC says that we can't expect more COVID-19 cases in the United States. Our healthcare system is ready for it. That there are all kinds of precautions already in place across the country in case it gets to more serious conditions that we're seeing in some other countries. But our healthcare system here is so good, and a lot of experts say part of the problem in some of these other countries is they weren't adequately prepared for it.
Thanks, Lori. Well, you know, folks, I know many of you are, I've heard about somebody thinks it's a Chinese plot to weaponize this disease and cause terror. There are a lot of people who think it's going to come here and they're scared to death about it. I want to show you something that's from the Psalms. I think it's very important. It says, "You will not fear the terror by night, nor the hour that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in the darkness, nor the plague that destroys at midday." Now, this is a pestilence and it is a plague, and God is saying, look, if you're my people, I'm going to look after you. So take heart, don't be scared. I think the idea of terror is just ridiculous, but the 91st Psalm, it will not come nigh you. So just take that and be bold in relation to your faith. But at the same time, don't forget to wash your hands, because that's very important.
That's exactly right.
Right. Well, in other news, Bernie Sanders smoked the competition in Nevada caucus, and now the Democrats are in full panic mode. What's going to happen when they have a socialist leading the ticket? Ephraim Graham has more.
Pat, the Vermont senator blew out his competition in the Nevada caucus Saturday, and now party leaders are wondering if he can be stopped. And they're afraid he'll lose to President Donald Trump in November. Gary Lane is on the story.
After his landslide win in Nevada's Democratic caucus over the weekend, Bernie Sanders predicts he'll ride the momentum all the way to the White House.
We're not only going to win here in Texas on Super Tuesday, we're going to beat Trump in November.
While the president may relish taking on the socialist Sanders as his opponent, the Democratic establishment is scared about the prospect of Bernie Sanders becoming their presidential nominee. And comments like this one on 60 Minutes about Fidel Castro and Cuba put Sanders back in the headlines.
It's unfair to simply say everything is bad. You know, when Fidel Castro came into office, you know what he did? He had a massive literacy program.
I don't think he can beat Donald Trump and keep a Democratic Senate, get a Democratic Senate and keep a Democratic House.
That concern has caused some Democrats running for Congress to distance themselves from Sanders and his socialist agenda, policies that are unlikely to win over voters in key congressional swing districts, including those Democrats won in 2018, and more conservative states. This Saturday, voters will be going to the polls in South Carolina. A new CBS News poll released Sunday shows Biden's lead in South Carolina narrowing over Sanders. Biden stands at 28% of likely Democrat voters, Sanders now at 23%. Biden's lead has dwindled since last October when it stood at 43%. The Democratic House Majority Whip, Congressman Jim Clyburn, that Sanders can keep the Nevada victory momentum going in his state.
This is South Carolina, and South Carolinians are pretty leery about that title, socialist.
If they turn out, black voters could make the difference in the South Carolina primary vote. Touting his experience with the African American community, Biden made an appeal on Sunday at a black church in North Charleston.
You have in your hands the power, unlike any time in a long time, to determine who the next Democratic nominee will be.
And if Biden wins a narrow victory over Sanders in South Carolina Saturday, it may not be enough to slow Sanders down, with that huge Super Tuesday primary just 3 days after that. If Sanders wins a majority of those 14 states, there may be little that worrisome Democratic Party leaders or Sanders' opponents like Biden and others could do to stop him from rolling forward to the nomination. Gary Lane, CBN News.
The eyes will be on South Carolina Saturday. Pat?
There was an interview with him. It was very well done. It was shown on national television over the weekend. And the question was asked, what do you want to do? Well, I want free health care for everybody. Okay. How much is it going to cost? Well, I haven't figured that out, but it's going to cost trillions, but we're going to get it from the rich. Well, there should be free college tuition for everybody. Well, how are you going to pay for that? Well, I'm going to get it from the rich. Well, I think there should be free transportation for everybody. Well, how are you going to pay for that? Well, it's going to get it from the rich. And you just think, how many taxes are we going to be had? And he hasn't thought through any of it. He does not have the math on any of these programs. But, of course, the young people think it's wonderful. We're going to have free college tuition. We're going to have remission of all debts. We're going to have free health care. We're going to have goodies that you just cannot believe. And who's going to pay for it? Well, the government is, and all those rich people that Bernie Sanders is going to tax. Well, you can't do that. You know, you as I said the other day, the old saw is you get more of what you subsidize and you get less of what you tax. So if you want free enterprise, you can't tax it out of existence. And you have somebody who went to Moscow for his wedding because he thought the communists were the wave of the future. You have somebody whose programs are just so far out, it's crazy. But what about the down market candidates? They're all running away from the socialist. They don't want to be associated with him because they know they'll go down. But at the same time, if he does get in and he has a Congress that's in his favor, can we conceive of what's going to happen? It's going to be an interesting thing. And by the way, I just heard over the weekend that the word is Argentina is in danger of going communist, just socialist, or whatever term you want to use, just like Venezuela and, of course, like Bolivia. And if that happens in Latin America with a country as big as Argentina, that could be a major problem. So our people were warned by sources in Brazil that if Argentina goes, that's a major problem. But Argentina is a very, very rich country. You know, the river in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, is called the Rio Plata, the river of silver. It was so wealthy. And under Juan Perón, it got out of hand, and they've had nothing but trouble. But if Argentina goes communist, then you've got Venezuela, you've got Bolivia with Morales, and now if you've got somebody in the Northern Hemisphere who's talking socialism, do we want to be like Nicaragua, which is desperately poor? Do we want to be like Cuba, which is desperately poor and oppressed? Do we want to have something like that existed under Stalin's communism? Do we want that in America? Well, the voters are going to have to decide. Efren?
Pat, there are new reports. There's no intelligence information that Russia is interfering in the presidential election to help President Donald Trump get reelected. Media stories last week said the Russians were working to boost the president, something both President Trump and his team denied, including National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien.
I have not seen that, and I get pretty good access.
Now, the new reports say the intelligence briefer reportedly overstated Russia's actions, leaving out key elements. Intelligence reports do say Russia is trying to help Bernie Sanders' campaign, although it's not clear how they might be doing that. President Trump says he is ready to sign a peace deal with the Taliban in Afghanistan if the temporary truce holds up.
Look, the Taliban has been fighting for decades. We've been over there 19 years. We're like a law enforcement force. We think they want to make a deal. We want to make a deal. I think it's going to work out. We'll see.
Afghanistan is America's longest war, 18 years. If the truce proves to be a success, the peace accord will be signed Saturday, and that will fulfill one of President Trump's chief campaign promises. Pat?
Well, it may be a promise, but folks, do you remember what happened under the Taliban? Do you remember what they did to women? Do you remember how they denied women education? Do you remember how they had to wear covered-up burqas and be beaten? Can you imagine what those Taliban did? And all we're saying to them, if you behave for 1 week, you behave, you don't blow up any of our people for a week, you don't do nasty things for a week, then we'll make a deal with you. Wow. How many people would say, okay, Donald, I'll take your deal. I'll behave for a week. Yeah. 1 week.
What do you think? I mean, I know he's trying to fulfill a promise that was made, but he's smarter than that. Why would he do that?
I just think he wants to get the troops out of Afghanistan. It's been nothing but a quagmire. But this Taliban, they are bad people. And their view of women is just appalling. And the idea it was against the law to educate girls. They couldn't go to school. I mean, you go down the list of the offenses they made. And it wasn't just women, it's people in general. And, you know, if people weren't covered, they had a thought police that would out and beat the women. You know, if they showed a half an inch of skin, the Taliban police were out after them. I mean, it's just horrible to contemplate. And we say, well, okay, you behave for a week. You behave for a week. Don't you blow any of our people up for a week. Don't you shoot any of our soldiers for a week. And if you don't do that for the whole week, then we'll make a deal.